The cat was already on the porch when Mara opened the door. That detail matters, because Mara had not heard anything. No scratching, no sound at all. Just the particular silence of a morning that felt wrong before she had a reason to name it wrong. She had gone to the door because she could not sleep, the way she could not sleep most mornings now. And when she turned the handle and stepped out into the pale November air, the cat was already there, and it was already putting something down. Mara stood in the doorway for a long moment, not moving. The cat was small and gray and very thin, with the kind of thinness that comes from weeks of not enough. And she was placing something inside the cardboard box that had been sitting on the porch for 3 months. Placing it carefully, the way you would set down something fragile, the way you would set down something you had carried a long way. Mara looked at what was in the box. Then she looked at the cat. The cat looked back at her with eyes that were the color of winter light, and then it turned and disappeared through the gap in the porch railing, dropping silently into the garden below, and was gone. Mara stepped forward. She looked into the box. There was a kitten inside it, newborn, barely the size of her fist, its eyes sealed shut, its small mouth opening and closing against the cold. Alive. And the box it was lying in had been lined, since August, with the 2 small blankets and the single yellow onesie that Mara had never been able to throw away. She would tell this story many times in the years that followed. The part she always paused before was this part. Not what came later, not the highway, not the scar. This moment. Standing in the November cold with her hand over her mouth, and a newborn kitten making no sound in a box she had left outside because she could not bear to have it inside anymore. She had no idea then what the next 4 days would cost the cat who had chosen her door. She had no idea how far that animal had already come. Mara Voss had moved into the house on Deller Street 11 months before, in December of the previous year, when she and her husband Elliot had decided that the apartment downtown was too small for what they were planning. That was how she thought about it now. What they were planning. As though it had been a business arrangement, a project with a timeline, something that could be described without the weight of it. The house on Deller Street was an old craftsman bungalow with creaking floors and a kitchen that faced east, and Mara had loved it from the first showing. She had loved the porch especially, the way it was deep enough to sit on even in light rain, the way the railing was low and the garden beyond it spilled out in a tangle of rosemary and something Mara could not identify that bloomed purple in May. Elliot had pretended to negotiate on the price. Mara had already decided. They had moved in on a Saturday. By the following Tuesday, she had hung a bird feeder outside the kitchen window. By the weekend, she had started reading about what the room at the top of the stairs got in terms of afternoon light, and whether afternoon light was better or worse than morning light for what they were thinking about doing with it. 8 months later, the room at the top of the stairs was still empty. The box had come in August, ordered online on a Tuesday night when Mara had been unable to stop herself, still holding on to the idea that the doctors might be wrong, that the word they had used might apply to someone else, that her body might have kept a secret from all of them. The box had arrived the following Thursday. She had opened it. She had looked at what was inside. She had carried it to the porch and set it against the railing and gone back inside and not touched it again. Elliot had offered to move it. She had said no. She did not know why. Something about leaving it there felt like the only form of honesty she could manage. That was 3 months before the cat arrived. In the weeks between August and November, Mara had learned the specific geography of grief that nobody describes to you in advance. She had learned that it did not come in waves, the way people said, but in sudden vertical drops like stepping off a curb you did not see. She had learned that the worst moments were not the large and obvious ones, but the small and incidental ones. The baby food advertisement that played before a video she had not chosen to watch. The offhand question from a coworker who had not heard. Folded piece of paper on which she had written a name. What she had lost was a pregnancy at 22 weeks. That is the clinical way to say it. And it is also the way that Mara preferred to say it to people who did not already know, because it had the mercy of precision, of a thing that could be stated cleanly and then left where it was stated. What the clinical language did not carry was the particular weight of 22 weeks. It did not carry the 2 appointments in August alone, Elliot traveling for work both times, Mara lying on a table in a room that smelled like antiseptic and listening to a heartbeat through a speaker, while a wadu technician moved a wand across her stomach and said nothing for a very long time before calling someone else in. The clinical language did not carry what it meant that Mara had already told her mother, that she had already told Elliot's sister, that she had already bought the box. She had not written another name. She had put the paper in the box on the porch, under the yellow onesie, and she had gone back inside and locked the door. Elliot did not know about the piece of paper. There were things they had not been able to say to each other, not because they did not love each other, but because some things feel too careful to put into words. He had gone back to work after 2 weeks. She had stayed home for 6. When she returned, people were kind to her in the way that people are kind when they do not know what else to do, which is to say they were kind and distant at the same time, and Mara had been grateful for the distance even when it hurt. The distance with Elliot was different from the distance with coworkers or acquaintances, and harder. He was present. He was trying. He brought her tea in the evenings without asking if she wanted it, and he left room in the bed for the way she sometimes needed to put space between herself and everything, and he did not push. She knew this was care. She also knew that she had not been able to tell him about the paper with the name, and that the fact she could not tell him sat between them, like a room neither of them could figure out how to enter. The grief counselor she had seen twice before she decided she was not ready had said something that she found herself returning to in the middle of the night. She had said, "The ones who recover are not the ones who find a way to stop feeling it. They are the ones who find a way to let the feeling have somewhere to go." Mara had not known what to do with that. She had thought about it for 3 months in the particular silence of the house on Duller Street, and she had not found an answer. By November, she had found a version of daily life she could sustain. She slept badly. She cooked things that required concentration. She went for long walks in the early evening, before the light went fully, taking routes that avoided the park near their old apartment, where a playground had been installed the previous spring. She had started feeding the birds again. She had started reading again, not deeply, but reading. She told herself this constituted progress, and she believed it enough to get through the days. She had not touched the box on the porch, and then she was standing in the doorway in the cold, and the box had a kitten in it. The cat came back 2 hours later. Mara had brought the kitten inside, not knowing what else to do, wrapping it in a dish towel and holding it against her chest, because the internet had told her that body heat was critical, that the first hours were the hours that mattered. She had called the nearest emergency vet and been told to keep it warm and bring it in if it showed signs of distress. She had fed it carefully with the tip of her finger dipped in warm water because she did not have formula. She was sitting on the kitchen floor when she heard the sound on the porch. The same soft landing, the same silence. She went to the door and opened it, and the gray cat was there again, and this time there was another kitten in the box. Mara sat down on the porch floor, right there on the cold boards in her socks, because her legs had made a decision that she had not made consciously. She sat down and watched the cat settle the kitten against the blanket with its nose, nudging it with a patience that had no urgency in it despite everything, and then the cat looked at her. There was something in the way the animal looked at her that Mara did not know how to put into words. Not intelligence in the way people mean when they say a dog looks intelligent. not a human thing at all. Something older than that. Something that had been doing what it was doing long before anyone had words for it. Then the cat was gone again, back over the railing, disappearing into the gray garden. Mara sat on the porch for a long time. The cold came up through the boards, and she did not move. She was thinking about the distance from this porch to wherever the cat had come from, and about the weight of a newborn kitten in the mouth of an animal that probably weighed less than 4 pounds herself, and about what it meant to make a choice like that. She did not know yet about the highway. She did not know yet that the cat had crossed it 4 times already. The third kitten arrived before noon. By then, Mara had set up a kind of station inside, near the radiator in the hallway, where the 2 kittens lay in the dish towel she had layered into a shallow ball shape. She had driven to the pharmacy and come back with kitten formula and a small syringe the pharmacist had found in the back without being asked, and she had been feeding them every 45 minutes with the concentration of someone diffusing something, because concentration was the only way to be in a room with this much smallness without losing herself entirely. The feeding itself was almost unbearably tender. The kittens were too young to understand what was being offered, but they found it anyway. The small mouth closing around the tip of the syringe with an instinct that needed no instruction. Mara sat on the floor each time and held the towel in her lap and did not think. She had gotten good at not thinking. It was the skill she had worked hardest on in the past 3 months, and the one she found most useful now. She heard the cat on the porch while she was washing her hands. She went to the door. Third kitten. The cat placed it the way it had placed the others, with the same deliberate care, and looked at Mara, and Mara looked back. The cat was breathing harder this time. Mara could see it. The flanks moving with a visible effort, the kind of breathing that comes after sustained exertion in the cold. And there was something on the cat's left shoulder that Mara had not noticed before. A patch of fur that sat wrong, pressed flat in a way that suggested something underneath it was wrong too. Mara crouched down and reached out her hand. The cat went still, not afraid exactly. Considering, Mara waited. She did not move her hand. She had not owned a cat, had barely interacted with cats, had no particular strategy here. She just held her hand out in the cold and waited. After a moment, the cat stepped forward and pressed its head against Mara's palm. The touch lasted 3 seconds. Then the cat pulled back, looked at her once more with those winter-colored eyes, and went back over the railing. Mara sat there on the porch with her hand still extended, feeling the exact temperature of where the cat had been. She thought, there is at least one more. She thought, where is she going? She thought, how far? She thought about what it cost to come back. She had been watching the cat on each return, the way the body arrived with slightly less reserve each time, the economy of motion tightening, a machine running down toward the bottom of what it had left. She had seen that before, not in a cat, but in a person. Her father, in his last year, had moved like that, with the particular efficiency of someone who knows they are spending what they cannot afford to spend, but has decided the expenditure is worth it. She did not know why that thought arrived at that moment. She put it aside the way she put things aside now, carefully and not too far from reach, as she went inside and got her car keys. She went to the 24-hour pharmacy 3 miles away and bought the highest calorie cat food they had, and a shallow dish, and a warming pad meant for seedlings, and an extra syringe and 2 more dish towels. And she drove home and set it all on the porch with the dish filled and the warming pad running under the towel in the corner. And she went back inside and left the porch door open by 3 inches. She sat in the kitchen and waited. The 4th kitten arrived just after 2 in the afternoon. This time the cat did not leave immediately. She placed the 4th kitten in the box, and then she stood over all 4 of them, her nose going from one to the next, the way Mara had seen the vet do once with a stethoscope, checking, accounting for, making sure. Then she found the dish of food. Mara watched from inside, through the glass of the door. The cat ate with the focus of an animal that had been running on almost nothing for longer than anyone watching could calculate. She ate everything in the dish, and then she cleaned her face, and she lay down in the warm corner of the box among the 4 kittens, and she did not leave. Mara opened the door wider. The cat looked at her, did not move. Mara sat down on the floor of the hallway, just inside the door, close enough to see, but not close enough to be a threat, and she did not say anything. She had gotten past the point where she had words. She just sat there, in her own house, on a Thursday afternoon in November, watching a gray cat nurse 4 kittens in a cardboard box that had once held the things Mara had bought for a child who had not come home. She sat there for a long time, long enough for the afternoon light to shift from pale to gold to the flat gray that preceded dusk, long enough for the sound of a neighbor's car to arrive and depart, and for the birds at the feeder to finish for the day, long enough that at some point she was no longer watching the cat, but simply present in the same space, breathing in the same rhythm, her back against the wall and her knees pulled up, occupying the hallway the way you occupy a waiting room when you have stopped worrying about the wait. She did not know, sitting there, what was happening to her. She would not have been able to name it. The grief counselor had said, "Let the feeling have somewhere to go." Mara had spent 3 months not understanding what that meant. Sitting in the hallway with this cat and these 4 kittens while the November light died outside the window, she began, in the vaguest and most physical way, to understand. Not because the cat had fixed anything, not because the kittens had replaced anything. Those were the wrong frames entirely, and Mara would have resisted them even then. But because something that was alive and small and very much in need of the next hour had arrived in her house, and she had been there to receive it, and the receiving had required her whole attention, and her whole attention had not left room for the particular darkness that came when attention slipped. The feeling did not have a name, it had a location. It was in her chest, about 3 inches below where the grief usually sat. She would not understand the difference until much later. The cat was still there the next morning, and the morning after that. She allowed Mara to move the box inside to the hallway, and she allowed Mara to come close enough to refill the food dish and to check the kittens. And she accepted all of this with a watchfulness that was not wariness but assessment, the way a person watches someone they are not yet sure about. On the second morning, Mara brought the box into the living room, near the window where the heat was more even, and the cat moved through the new space once, thoroughly, before returning to the kittens. On the second afternoon, Elliot came home early and found his wife sitting cross-legged on the living room floor next to a cardboard box containing a cat and 4 newborns, all of them asleep, and Mara looking at them with an expression he had not seen on her face in a long time. He set his bag down very quietly. He sat on the floor next to her without asking questions. After a while, Mara told him about the porch, about the first morning, about counting the trips, about the food dish and the syringe and the 45-minute feedings. Elliot listened to all of it. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in the back of Mara's mind since the first morning. She said she did not know where the cat had come from. She said she had been thinking about it constantly. What she did not know, because she had not yet gone looking, was that the question had an answer, that the answer was closer than she expected and much harder than she was prepared for. That should have been enough for 1 week. But the story was not finished. On the 3rd day, Mara noticed the wound. She had gotten close enough to the cat to see it properly now. The patch on the left shoulder that sat wrong was larger than she had thought, and when she angled the desk lamp toward it, she could see that the fur there was not just matted, but gone in a section about, the size of a silver dollar, and beneath the missing fur there was a line of dried blood that had sealed itself into a dark seam. She called the vet. The vet said to bring the cat in, that any wound left untreated in an animal that had recently given birth was serious. Mara looked at the 4 kittens. She looked at the cat, who was looking back at her. She said, "I need to borrow her for a few hours." She said this out loud to the cat because she was past caring how that sounded. At the clinic, the vet examined the wound carefully and then looked at Mara with an expression that meant she was about to say something she had decided to say neutrally. The wound was consistent with a vehicle strike, a grazing impact, something large moving fast. The cat had not been hit directly, the vet said, but had been caught by the edge of something. And had she not been moving at the angle she was moving at when it happened, the outcome would have been very different. Mara stood in the examination room and said nothing for a moment. Then she asked, "When?" The vet studied the wound more carefully. The healing was at a stage, she said, of approximately 3 to 5 days. Mara did not need to count backward. She already knew. The cat had been struck sometime during the days she was carrying her kittens to the house on Deller Street. During the crossings, she had been struck, and she had kept going. The vet gave her antibiotics and instructions, and spoke carefully about maternal instinct in felines, about the neurological persistence that characterizes animals in high-stress maternal states, about the documented cases of cats traveling remarkable distances for shelter. She was thorough and kind. Mara listened to all of it. She nodded. She thanked her. She carried the cat to the car and sat in the parking lot for a long time before she felt able to drive. The highway that ran between the industrial blocks and the residential streets of her neighborhood was a road she had driven hundreds of times. She knew its particular character. 4 lanes, no shoulder, a speed limit of 55 that most traffic ignored upward. At night, the headlights came fast and close. There were no pedestrian crossings for a quarter of a mile in either direction from where the most direct route would have crossed it. The city had installed reflective lane markers in April of the previous year, after a series of accidents. She thought about an animal the size of a large handful of yarn crossing that road in November, crossing it with a kitten in her mouth, then going back, crossing again. She thought about what had struck the cat, the edge of a bumper, probably at 55 miles per hour or more. She thought about what that would feel like. She thought about the animal absorbing it and continuing. There is a word that Mara had been given by the grief counselor in one of the 2 sessions she had attended: agency. The counselor had talked about the importance of finding agency in the aftermath of loss, of finding things you could do in the face of things that had been done to you. Mara had thought the word sounded hollow at the time, abstract in the way that therapeutic language sometimes goes abstract, like a map that has the right labels but no actual terrain. She sat in that parking lot and thought about agency in the context of an animal that had been struck by a car while carrying something small and necessary through the dark and kept going. She thought about the highway. She thought about October. She thought about a demolished building and a cat who had lived in its walls and had decided, when the walls came down, not to stop. She was not thinking about herself. She was genuinely, entirely not thinking about herself. But she sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes before she could see clearly enough to drive home. She went back to find the answer to where the cat had come from. She needed to understand the full length of what had been traveled. She owed it that much, she felt. She owed it knowing. It took her 2 days to find the answer, and she would not have found it without the woman at the laundromat on Crane Street. Mara had gone back toward the highway the morning after the vet visit, walking the route she thought the cat might have taken, following the logic of where a street cat would shelter in the blocks east of the road. The area east of the highway was transitional in the way that parts of most cities are transitional, not fully industrial, not residential. A geography of warehouses converted to storage and garages, and small businesses operating out of spaces that cost less than they should. The streets were quieter than the residential side. There were fewer people who would have noticed a cat. She had asked at the bodega on the corner of Crane and Merton, where the man behind the counter had shrugged with genuine disinterest, and at the garage on Merton, where a woman in coveralls had thought about it and said maybe she had seen a gray cat around sometimes, but that had been a while ago. She had gone into the alley behind the Chinese restaurant, whose exhaust fan faced the street, and asked the two young men taking a smoke break, and they had looked at her with the particular expression of people who are not unkind, but who find the question strange. No one had seen the cat in the past weeks, which meant nothing, except that the cat had not been sheltering near any of these places when she decided to move. The laundromat was on her third pass of the block, a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and a shuttered printing shop, the kind of place that runs on the same customers for 20 years and does not need to advertise. The woman inside was maybe 60, with close-cropped gray hair and hands that had done a lot of work, and she was folding something when Mara pushed the door open into the warmth and the smell of detergent. Mara described the cat. Small, gray, very thin, winter-colored eyes. The woman stopped folding. She set down what was in her hands and looked at Mara steadily. She said, "You found her." Mara said yes. She said she found her and her kittens. The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We thought she was gone. After the demo, they said they had cleared the animals out, but we never saw her again, and we assumed." Mara asked what demo. The woman pointed through the laundromat window at a lot on the far side of the street, where a chain-link fence enclosed a cleared concrete slab and a pile of rubble that had not yet been hauled. There had been a building there, she said. A 3-story warehouse, one of the old ones. That had been subdivided into storage units over the decades and used and disused and finally left empty. The company that owned it had been trying to get the demolition permitted for 2 summers. In October, they had finally gotten through the last of the approvals, and the building had come down in 4 days. There had been a colony, she said. She said it matter-of-factly, the way people who feed street animals talk about colonies as a fact of the neighborhood. 6 or 8 cats, maybe more at different times of year, living in the ground level among the old storage crates and the broken pallets and whatever warmth the thick old walls held in winter. People in the neighborhood had been feeding them for years. When the demolition notice went up, a woman named Pat, who lived 2 blocks over, had organized a trapping effort. They had borrowed humane traps from the shelter. They had baited them for 2 weeks. Most of the cats had been caught. 4 of them had been relocated to a farm outside the city where someone Pat knew managed ferals. 1 had been found injured and treated and was now living with a family in the northern part of the city. But the gray one had been pregnant, and she had moved herself deep into the structure when the trapping started, into the parts of the ground floor where the old storage system had left crawl spaces and internal compartments that a cat could navigate and a trap could not reach. They had tried for 10 days. The building came down the following Monday. The gray cat had not come out. The woman paused. She said, "We thought the demo got her." Mara stood in the warm laundromat and did the calculation that she had already been doing in the back of her mind since the vet visit. October demolition. Cat surviving it somehow. Displaced, homeless, pregnant. November. 4 kittens. 2.5 kilometers of city between the rubble of that warehouse and a porch on Deller Street. She asked, how did she choose? The woman looked at her. She said, "I don't know that there's an answer to that." She said, "What I know is that she was always different from the others. The others would scatter when you came to put the food down. She would sit and watch you. We used to joke that she was taking notes. One of the men who fed them in the mornings said she was waiting to see if you were worth trusting." She said, maybe she was waiting a long time for that answer. And then she found it. She stood on the sidewalk across from the demolished lot and looked at the rubble and the chain-link fence and the cold concrete, and she thought about October, about a pregnant cat hidden in the deep structure of a building while the walls came down around her, and then finding herself alone in the open air of a demolished block in a city that was not particularly interested in her survival. She thought about what it takes to decide, not here, not this, somewhere else. She thought about walking away from the place where everything you knew used to be, with nowhere to go and every reason to stop, and walking anyway. She was not thinking about herself when she thought this. She was genuinely not thinking about herself, but she was crying by the time she got back to the car. The kind of crying that does not feel like sadness exactly. The kind that feels like something moving through you that has been waiting for a direction. The kittens grew. That is the simple way to say it and the true way to say it. They grew with the concentrated urgency of things that are very small and need to become larger as soon as possible. And by the end of the 3rd week, their eyes were open and they were crawling across the dish towel with a determination that was charming and slightly alarming. And Mara had started referring to them by names she tried not to get attached to and had entirely gotten attached to. The gray cat, whom Mara had begun calling Vera without quite deciding to, healed steadily. The wound on her shoulder closed. She filled out. She slept in long, boneless arrangements that took up significantly more space than her size suggested, and she accepted the household on her own terms, which meant she sat where she wanted to sit and was affectionate when she chose to be and watchful always, with those pale eyes that seemed to catalog everything without judgment. She chose Mara, not Elliot, though she tolerated him with a dignity that he found both funny and slightly wounding. She chose Mara in the specific, considered way that cats choose, which is to say she was simply there when Mara was there, on the couch when Mara read, in the kitchen doorway when Mara cooked, at the foot of the bed, not on it, in the specific hours between 2 and 5 in the morning when Mara still sometimes woke and could not go back. Those hours had been the worst hours for a long time. The particular quality of dark in those hours, the way the house was very quiet and the mind was not. Mara had learned to manage them, to lie still and do the breathing exercises her doctor had recommended and wait them out with the gritted patience of someone who knows the light will come. Vera did not fix those hours. She did not make them shorter or less dark or less quiet. But she was there. That cold weight at the foot of the bed, the small sounds of a sleeping animal, the particular presence of something alive and undemanding in the same room. Mara had not known how much she had needed that until she had it. She had not known how much she had been alone in those hours until she was no longer alone. Elliot asked, in late December, what she wanted to do. He asked it carefully, the way he asked the things that mattered. He was a careful person, Elliot, careful in the way that some people are careful, because they are afraid of breaking things. And it had sometimes felt to Mara, over the past year, like they were both being so careful with each other that the space between them had become a kind of held breath. Whether that was a decision, or whether it had already been made. Mara said it had already been made. He asked about the other thing. He did not name it. They had gotten good at not naming things. Mara looked at the window for a moment. She said, "I don't know yet." She said, "I think I need a little more time." He said, "Okay." She said, "I put a name on a piece of paper. In August, I put it in the box." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What name?" She told him. It was the name of his grandmother, whom he had not met, who had died in the summer of the year he was born. He said nothing for a long time. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers. They sat like that for a while. Vera came and sat on the table between them, which she was not supposed to do, and looked at them both with her pale eyes, and neither of them told her to get down. The piece of paper is still in the box. Mara keeps it on the shelf in the room at the top of the stairs now, the room that gets the afternoon light. Not because the box is a memorial. Not because she has made it into something symbolic or decided it means something fixed. She keeps it there because it is true, and because she has found that she can be in a room with things that are true without being destroyed by them, which is not the same as being unaffected by them, but which is something. The 5 cats live in the house. 4 of them were eventually given names that suited them. One of them, the smallest of the 4 kittens, the one that had not been breathing when Mara first found it in the box, sits most often in the room at the top of the stairs and watches the afternoon light move across the floor with the serene attention of something that does not know it almost did not exist. Vera sleeps in the hallway outside that room. She has slept there since the day Mara moved the shelf in. Mara has thought about this. She has thought about it the way you think about things that do not have clean explanations, turning them in the light to see what they are. She is not a person who uses the word miracle easily. She is not a person who explains things with forces she cannot see. But she has sat in that room on late afternoons and felt the specific quality of a life that has been interrupted and resumed. And she has understood something about the difference between continuing and recovering that she does not think she could have understood any other way. The woman from the laundromat on Crane Street asked once, after she had come to see the cats, whether Mara thought the cat had chosen that particular house on purpose. Mara said she did not know. She said she was not sure the question had an answer. The woman said she always watched people. She was always looking for something specific. Mara thought about a gray cat on a demolished lot in October, alone, with the city around her and no structure left to shelter in, and the things she was carrying not yet born, deciding to move, deciding to cross 4 lanes of highway in the dark, deciding to cross them again and again, with a wound she had not stopped for. She thought about what it means to carry something toward a place you cannot see yet, because you have decided, with no evidence, but the deciding itself, that the place exists. She said, maybe she found what she was looking for. The woman nodded. She did not say anything else. Outside the window, November had turned to March, and the garden off the porch was beginning to come back in the way gardens do, without being asked, without anyone organizing it, just returning, because that is what living things do when the conditions are not entirely against them. The shoebox was still on the porch. Mara had never been able to bring herself to move it.